Welcome to the Upjab podcast. We are back. I want to thank everybody who watched the previous podcast last week in the archives, man. I appreciate it. We got really good archive views with the podcast. And this week is fun for me, just strictly as a boxing fan, because it gives me some action to be excited about that we haven't had in previous weeks. And it starts an action-packed schedule of boxing for the next couple months. These next 12, 13 weeks of boxing, it's one of the best boxing schedules, best boxing windows I've seen in quite some time. Just really incredible, a lineup of fights that we have. But the reason Lubin versus Fundora sticks out to me this weekend is it gives us something that we don't often have in boxing. And I know you're thinking, like, what could that possibly be? I mean, it's Lubin versus Fundora. Good fight, but not the star-studded fight that you would think of. And in a weekend where it's the third biggest event, right? And appreciate y'all. Y'all leave comments and hit that like button as you come in. From Alice, Texas, USA. Thank you. I appreciate you watching. This is a weekend where you have Lubin versus Fundora would be the third biggest event, right? I mean, you got the return of Ryan Garcia. You got the super fight in Japan between Triple G and Murata. A lot on the line there. If Triple G were to win, he gets the Canelo fight. If Canelo gets past Bivol and lines himself up with another super fight later in the year. So an important fight and an important comeback for Ryan Garcia as well. But what's important about Lubin versus Fundora that we don't often get in boxing, if you follow Vegas odds closely like I do, it's a legitimate toss-up fight. We don't get too many legitimate toss-up fights, particularly on main events in boxing. If you look at the Vegas odds, this is as close as even as it comes between Lubin and Fundora. If you look at the boxing schedule, you'll see Golovkin versus Murata. Good fight. You see Valdez versus Stevenson. Good fight on paper. Good matchup. You see other fights. Spence versus Ugas. Another good matchup. Canelo versus Bivol. Another good matchup. Beterbiev versus Joe Smith Jr. Another good matchup. You have good matchup after good matchup after good matchup. Like I said, the schedule is hot. But what those fights aren't is true toss-up fights. As good as those fights are, Canelo is a minus 400 something favorite. I mean, Canelo is, Triple G is as well against Murata. Spence is a heavy betting favorite against Ugas. Stevenson is a heavy favorite against Valdez. So as good as those fights matchups are on paper, as excited as we are about them because they're top 5 matchups in their divisions, they're not true toss-up fights. Lubin versus Fundora gives us a true toss-up fight. The reason it is you have an experienced Lubin against an up-and-coming Fundora. This is a step-up fight for Fundora. Fundora is a fun fighter to watch. Stylistically, this is a fun fight because it gives you a guy in Fundora who punches and bunches, pressure fighter. The other interesting thing about this fight is the disparity in height and reach. Fundora has like a 9-inch height disparity against Erickson Lubin. He also has a 6-inch reach disparity against Lubin. And notice how I use the word disparity and not advantage. Because just because you're the taller fighter, just because you're the rangier fighter, doesn't mean you have the advantage against the opponent. The reason being is a lot of these guys don't know how to use their height. They don't know how to use their reach. So once you give that up, it actually becomes a disadvantage because the shorter, bulkier fighter gets on the inside and can touch you up. One thing we know about Fundora is he gives up his height and his reach, and he does that purposefully. The reason he does is he's willing to sacrifice his height and his reach and his range and staying at range for pressure, for activity. He's sort of like a Paul Williams type of guy, right? Except more awkward, taller. I don't think as good, but he's willing to give up those advantages, that disparity. He's sacrificing it for activity. He's sacrificing it for pressure. And one thing Emmanuel Stewart used to say that always stuck with me as a boxing fan Pressure is different when it's coming from a taller fighter. It's just a different type of pressure to deal with. He used to say that when he talked about Antonio Margarito. He used to say it when he talked about Paul Williams. Guys didn't want to deal with taller pressure fighters, and that's why guys like Paul Williams, Antonio Margarito had trouble getting fights, and Paul Williams had to sacrifice his advantages by moving up from 147 all the way up to 160 to get fights, because guys who were naturally shorter than him didn't want to deal with his taller pressure, his taller activity. And Emmanuel Stewart used to talk about that all the time. When you have a guy throwing punches down on you with that activity, it's tough to deal with. But Erickson Lubin, what makes this fight interesting and what makes him the slight, ever so slight favorite in this toss-up fight is he's shown that he can deal with pressure. If you watch the Rosario fight, and I know why this is, because people see this on the edge and they're like, I think Lubin is one of those undervalued fighters in boxing. Lubin got knocked out in the first round against 154 Charlo, has won 7 straight fights since. So he's sort of like an old school fighter, right? Loses to the top guy, gets to the back of the line, but works his way back fight by fight to where if he wins this fight, he has the inside track of landing a rematch with 154 Charlo if 154 Charlo beats Brian Castano. And oh, by the way, that would be an undisputed mandatory. Castano as well if he would win that fight. So Lubin has come back the hard way, 7 straight victories. He's been consistent. This will be his 6th fight in 36 months, 3 years. And he's beat guys like Ishe Smith. Not a great win, older Ishe Smith, but it's against the name. And then he beats Garcia, and then who Tim Tszyu just beat, and he beats Rosario. And how did he beat Rosario? He defeated Rosario with knockout body punching. And I think that's what Vegas is looking at. And that's what I'm looking at here as well. What does Fundora do? Fundora gives up his body. It's there to be hit. You got that 6'5" frame, long, Dowsum looking guy, awkward, throws a lot of punches. So the body is there to get hit for Fundora. It's there to get hit. Wide open. So if Lubin can stay patient, if he can use his experience, if he can use that experience, then we got ourselves a fight here. Because he can stay calm, he can stay in the pocket, he'll have those punches raining down on him. But guess what? You get low, you become the shorter, bulkier fighter on the inside, and you dig into that body. You sit on those body punches. Sit on those body punches. And I think that's Lubin's ticket here, is to stay on the inside, sit on those punches, and dig into the body. For Fundora, you just be Fundora. Be fun. Be awkward. Throw punches. Be yourself. Don't worry about what Lubin's doing. Don't worry about Lubin's game plan. Worry about focus on your game plan, punches and bunches, and try to overwhelm this guy with activity. Fundora is another guy, like what I'm saying, because he's fought. This will be his 9th fight in about 36 months, 3 calendar years. So he's been active, much like Lubin. A lot's alike. He's been active. He's been in people's faces. And this is a step-up fight for him. So if he beats Erickson Lubin, woo, we got something fun with Fundora. We got a guy who likes activity. We got an offensive output machine type of guy with a good name on his resume. And then we can start talking about Fundora. But Fundora, he's been active. He's been as active as his punch output in the ring. So you do that against Lubin and you try to overwhelm the guy with activity. But Lubin has the clear experience edge in this fight. And if he can use that to his advantage, if he can stay in this fight early, not get overwhelmed by that punch output, start to time Fundora, who becomes a pattern fighter as the fight goes on. So if you can stay in there with him, figure out the patterns, and start to sit down and dig into that body on the inside, Lubin can catch him in the middle rounds with some body punches, much like he did with Rosario. This is what I'm talking about, and this is what I opened up with. Terrible advice. He should fight behind the jab and use height and reach. He can't do that. He doesn't do that. Yeah, I mean, and this is what I was talking about at the beginning, is people assume just because you're the taller fighter, the rangier fighter, that you have an advantage. But if you don't know how to use that advantage, it becomes a disadvantage. And that's the case with that's the case here with Fundora. Fundora doesn't know how to fight that way. He wasn't taught to fight that way. Fundora is not going to work behind the jab. He's not going to keep Lubin at range. He's just not. That's not who he is. He's going to sacrifice his height and his reach advantage, that disparity, and that's why I call it a disparity and not an advantage. Just because you're the taller, rangier fighter doesn't mean you have the advantage. Because a lot of these guys don't know how to use height and reach to their advantage. Fundora is not that type of guy. Fundora sacrifices his height and his reach for activity and output. So, I mean, if you want to give him this advice and turn him into somebody else for the biggest fight of his career, try it. See how that goes. But if you want Fundora to use that as his game plan, God bless, man. The game plan should be stick to who you've been your whole career. You don't try to change a guy in his 19th fight in a step-up fight. I mean, we'll get a new trainer. We'll go talk to him. Tell him to get a new trainer. I don't know what to tell you. He doesn't have a new trainer. He has the same trainer who has brought him up. This is his style, much like it was Paul Williams' style, much like it was Antonio Margarito's style, to be the taller pressure fighter. So you'll give up your height, you'll give up your reach, and you'll rain down punches on top of the shorter fighter with taller activity. As Emmanuel Stewart said, taller, active fighters are tough to deal with. Taller pressure fighters are tough to deal with. And that's what his trainer has brought him up doing, much like that's what Paul Williams' trainer brought him up to do. And a lot of guys didn't want to deal with Paul Williams and Tony Margarito, so Paul Williams had to move up from 147 up to 160 to get fights. But if your game plan is to change Fundora away from what he was the first 18 fights in his 19th fight, which is a step-up fight, I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you. Fundora's got to be Fundora, and if it's not good enough, Lubin's the better fighter. And if it's not good enough, maybe we got to change his trainer, maybe we got to change his whole style, but I'm telling you, a guy is who he is at a certain point. He is who he is. You can't just change a trainer and change his style 19, 20 fights into a guy's career. Good luck, man. Good luck. All that being said, great matchup here in a true toss-up. We rarely get this in boxing. Like I said, we got great matchups coming. We got Canelo versus Bivol. We got Triple G Murata. We got Valdez Stevenson. We got Beterbiev versus Joe Smith Jr. We've got all these great matchups. We got Spence versus Ugas, but one thing we don't have in any of those fights is a true toss-up. As great as those matchups are, you see minus 300 favorite, minus 400 favorite, minus 500 favorite. But you don't see true toss-ups very often in boxing, and we got that here with Lubin versus Fundora. The only other fight I can think of on the horizon where we have a true toss-up is Serrano versus Taylor. Other than that, yeah, I mean, you're right. We got so many great fights coming up. This is one of the best 3-month windows I've seen in boxing in quite some time. It just is. So many great matchups. And although we have 3 events this weekend, and Lubin versus Fundora is the third biggest event of them, this is the most intriguing matchup of the weekend for me. Because we've got ourselves a pick'em fight. We don't know how this fight's going to play out. And I see this fight getting excited. I see it being awkward early. It's going to be awkward because they're going to try to figure each other out. There's going to be a lot of awkwardness. Southpaw versus Southpaw. Fundora is going to be a mess like he normally is, throwing a lot of punches. Lubin's going to start trying to time him. And when they figure this thing out, there's going to be a lot of punches landed, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Mosley Jr. versus Gabe Rosado, another good fight. It is. It is. Beterbiev, Joe Smith, no toss-up, that for sure. Worst champion in boxing. I agree that, but I think Beterbiev is going to beat the brakes off of Joe Smith Jr. I agree with that. And if he does, and Canelo gets past Bivol, and then Canelo gets past Triple G, if Triple G were to beat Murata, then there is no other fight to make than Canelo versus Beterbiev at that point. And imagine Canelo becoming undisputed at both 168 and 175. Woo! Woo! I'll tell you. But I want to talk about Ryan Garcia real quick as well, because he's fighting. This is true right here. Charlo Castaño 2. And I forgot about that one. Goodness gracious. And what a first fight that was. And a lot of people, more than not, felt like Castaño won that fight. And to me, that's a true toss-up. You're right. That's a true toss-up. That's a hell of a fight right there. May 14th in LA. But Ryan Garcia fights this weekend. And he fights against Tagu. And while we're talking about betting odds, Ryan Garcia is a minus 1,600 favorite after a 16-month layoff. Ryan Garcia's problem is this. Ryan Garcia has forged his identity outside of the ring and not what he's doing inside of the ring. He's a social media phenom. He is. We got to give him that. Very popular on Instagram. Popular on Twitter. I don't know if he's still on Twitter, but when he was popular, hitting the double M bag, doing all of these things going viral on Instagram. Huge star social media wise, but Jake Paul gives us that. When is Ryan Garcia going to forge his identity as a fighter inside of the ring? Every fighter has to create an identity. They do that with consistency. They do that with building a relationship with fans. There are two reasons that Ryan Garcia hasn't done that up to this point. And we talked about consistency. It's not fighting often enough, being inactive. He's just been an inactive fighter. And when he has been active, like this Saturday, he's fighting against not top competition. Tagu, minus 1,600 favorite. The troubling part about this is, and we've seen fighters come back from long layoffs and fight guys who they're heavy favorites against. That's nothing inordinary. We saw Burchelt do that against Nakathila, and he got upset. But he was a huge favorite coming into that fight. Ryan Garcia, a huge favorite going into this fight. The troubling part about this, to me, is we talk about consistency as a fighter. Building an identity, being consistent. Part of that is weight class. You have to campaign in a weight class. The reason you want to campaign in a weight class coming up is you want to be ranked in a certain weight class. You want to climb the rankings inside weight class. You want to build that identity as a fighter. Ryan Garcia, I don't know if people know this. This fight's at a catch weight of 139. 139. Ryan's identity is fighting with his head on a beam pole, only a matter of time before someone knocks his block clean off. Possibly. And that's the problem. We don't know how good he is or isn't. We just don't know. Not active enough, not fighting top competition. So who is he? We don't know his identity. As a fighter, we don't know what his style would be against top competition. We were just talking about Fundora. Fundora, top 5 guy at 154 possibly, but we say his ceiling is as high as Ryan Garcia, probably not. But what he has is an identity, and he has an identity because he's fought 9 times in the past 36 months, and we know his style going in. Identity. Ryan Garcia has no identity as a fighter. This fight's at 139. Why? It makes me wonder, why is this fight at 139? Are they planning on moving him up to junior welterweight? And if they're doing that, why isn't this fight at the full 140? Are they doing that because they don't want true junior welterweights calling him out? Are they doing that because they don't want Regis Prograis, Jose Ramirez, anybody calling him out? Teofimo Lopez moving up to 140. They don't want them calling Ryan Garcia out. It seems like he would have had enough time to make 135 in the 16-month layoff. So why not fight at 135? Can he not make lightweight anymore? Because he was a big lightweight. Can he not make lightweight anymore? And this adds to the enigma of Ryan Garcia. We don't know when Ryan Garcia is going to fight after this because he hasn't been active. We don't know if Ryan Garcia is ever going to step up and fight competition. And now adding to that enigma is another layer of not knowing this, Another layer to this is what weight class is this guy going to campaign in? Is he going to do like Tank Davis and just bounce around and just pick out of a hat and decide, oh, I'm going to fight at 135 this time. Oh, I'm going to fight at 140 this time. Oh, I might fight at 130. And just bounce around weight classes, and Golden Boy is going to manufacture beefs with inferior opposition for Ryan Garcia to fight, much like their Mayweather Promotions is doing with Tank Davis, fighting guys like Raleigh Romero, Isaac Cruz, Matteo Barrios, and keep him away from guys. But it adds to the enigma. You need an identity as a fighter. You need to forge a relationship with true boxing fans. And we know Ryan Garcia has a built-in base, and good for him, man. That's great. But if you want to be taken seriously, you have to forge that relationship with serious people who just follow the sport with no bias and will call out nonsense, will also give guys credit for doing great things and fighting top competition. Ryan Garcia doesn't have that relationship with those people yet because he doesn't have consistency. We've never seen him in there with top guys. We haven't seen him active enough to know who he is as a fighter. We don't know what his style is going to be against top competition. We don't know if he's going to fight 6 months from now or a year from now. We don't know if he does, when he does fight again, what caliber of opponent he's going to fight. And to add to that, what weight class is he going to fight in? Canelo weight. Canelo used to do that back in the day, but to Canelo's credit, there's no rehydration clauses. There's no, like, he's moving up to 175, fighting at the full 175 limit. No rehydration clauses to my knowledge. So give Canelo credit for that. But when it comes to Ryan Garcia, why 139? It's that, why is this guy fighting at 139? What are we missing here? What are his handlers telling us right now? Because there's two things that tell you all you need to know about a fighter. One, how their handlers handle them. How aggressive are they? How reluctant are they? Number two, how do their peers in and around the weight class react to them? Ryan Garcia's handlers seem to be a little delicate with him. And when Ryan Garcia's name comes up amongst his peers, they're like, I'd fight that guy. I don't see anybody saying, Ryan Garcia, I don't really want that fight. Everybody's pretty much saying they'd fight Ryan Garcia. You have to build that relationship, man. And you have to, in order to move up the rankings, in order to get on pound for pound lists, you have to do serious things according to serious people. You eventually have to go through that fire. And Tank Davis, I don't care if ESPN put him number 10 on their list. There has to be an ulterior motive there because he doesn't belong anywhere near there either. You have to do serious things to serious people. You have to go through that fire. And right now, Ryan Garcia, to me, other than he's not an enigma outside of the ring. He's not. I mean, we know we're going to get from Ryan Garcia. We know we're going to get the women loving him. We know we're going to get some double in bag punching. We know we're going to get Instagram highlights. He's built that identity, but you have to back that up inside of the ring. You have to build an identity as a fighter inside of the ring. And Ryan Garcia, up to this point, has not done that. And that's why there's a disconnect between him and true boxing fans. True boxing fans. And shout out to D-Style Boxing. I want to give a quick shout out before I end this thing to HCP 100. Great show last night. Go check it out on D-Style Boxing's channel. And congrats to him and G-Funky on 100 shows. On that note, man, I am out of here. The Upjab is back tomorrow. God bless to everybody. I'm out. Peace.